Ray walked into the cruise terminal feeling on top of the world. This feeling seemed to be shared by everyone in the terminal. What could be more exciting than a vacation in the Caribbean, right? If all goes according to plan, the highlight of this trip will be a memory he will cherish for the rest of his life. The young man stopped near the entrance to the registration line and looked around. "Missy should be here by now. She always comes very early," he thought. The 5 times they flew together, she arrived at the airport 3 hours early. Now she wasn't there yet. "Ray!" He turned around and saw Dina walking towards him through the crowd. Dina, Missy's best friend, and her boyfriend Lars were also scheduled to come. They were all looking forward to the trip. But Dina was not dressed for a cruise, Ray noted. He frowned when he saw that she didn't even have a bag with her. Dina walked up to Ray, but didn't look at him. Ray has already seen his plans go down the toilet. "What the hell is going on?" It's not like that. It's for you." Dina handed over a pale of blue envelope. His shoulders slumped. "Is she breaking up with me?" "No." Ray said. "They dated for almost 3 years." "At least she didn't do it via text." Ray's voice dripped with bitterness. Dina flinched as if she had been poked. Finally, Dina gathered her courage and looked at him. Ray was a nice guy. Dark-eyed and dark-haired, fit, 28 years old, educated and hard-working. He always took care of himself. "I think she figured out your plan for this trip and got mad." "I'm so sorry, Ray. She's such a stupid bitch." Dina reached out and grabbed Ray's forearm. "Lars sends his best wishes." Ray nodded. Dina kissed him tenderly on the cheek and left the terminal. He put the envelope in his pocket. "Well, old man, repetition is the mother of learning," he whispered, not addressing anyone in particular. Ray picked up his backpack, slung it over the handle of his rolling duffel bag, and headed toward the front desk. The pretty blonde smiled sweetly at him, taking his passport in her hands. "Is the rest of your company here?" Ray didn't smile back. "There is no company, just me." Her face fell. "Okay, let me take a look at..." "Oh." She saw the nature of the booking and realized that nothing could be done. Ray received his boarding pass and itinerary. "I'm sorry." Ray smiled faintly. "Yes, it seems that this is the general opinion." At 3 p.m., Ray boarded the Atlantic Star, the flagship of Pinnacle Cruise Lines. The ship was over 1,000 feet long and had 20 decks. A bright blue and gold banner hung above the ramp. Pinnacle Cruise Lines welcomed the Davidson High School class of 1997. He seemed to perk up when he saw this. Maybe there is a ray of hope in this dark cloud. The 25-year reunion meant there might have been a few out-of-control, shifty-eyed soccer moms there. This might be interesting for a newly released guy. Ray hung around the deck, like many of the passengers, to enjoy the moment as the ship pulled away from the pier. It was a gorgeous day in Port Canaveral. He pulled the envelope out of his pocket and opened it. Inside was a folded letter. Ray's eyes rolled back in his head, and he made a disappointed noise when he finished reading it. If you can imagine an archetypal breakup letter, this was it. "Ray, I'm so sorry, but blah, 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 you're such a wonderful guy. Blah, 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 I'm just not ready. Blah, 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 I know that one day you will find someone wonderful. Blah, 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 we can still be friends. Blah, blah, blah. Missy." This "we can still be friends" part hit the hardest. This wasn't the first time this happened. Ray folded the paper and stuffed it and the envelope back into his jeans pocket to throw away later. Why the hell do I always seem like a temporary guy? Good enough to be with me, but not good enough to stay forever. Almost 3 years, and it's like this again. Ray was seething with anger. Tears of disappointment welled up, but he wiped them away angrily. Ray stood at the rail with the other passengers as the Atlantic Star set sail, sounding 2 long blasts as the last mooring line was hoisted aboard. There was a lot of applause from everyone, with people waving to loved ones on the pier. No one accompanied him. The cabin was spacious. It had a central living room with a balcony and 2 bedrooms with their own bathrooms. He booked a family suite for the 4 of them. There was plenty of space. Now this was to be a sad reminder of what was supposed to be 5 fun days. Ray unpacked his things and decided to wander around the ship a bit as the ship was leaving Port Canaveral. Eventually, he ended up at a cafe to get something to eat. While returning to his cabin, Ray passed by the ship's comedy theater and noticed people coming in for the evening show. Thinking that it was almost impossible to be unhappy in a comedy show, he joined the others. The first smile of the trip finally appeared on his face. 90 minutes of comedy and 2 drinks later, Ray felt much better. Laughter and good beer seemed to put him in order. Taking a detour, Ray made his way to his cabin, making a mental list of all kinds of crap about Missy. The list turned out to be much longer than he thought. Ray decided that in any future relationship, such a list should be made in advance. Because I'll be damned if I turn out to be a 3-time failure, he thought gloomily. The guide maps on the bulkheads were excellent, and he found his way to his passage without difficulty. Ray heard before he saw a couple arguing around the corner. "So, you took me on your homecoming cruise just to hook up with your old high school bitch on the very first night, huh?" A very excited female voice almost shouted. "Ooh," Ray thought as he turned the corner. 3 doors down to the right stood a tall couple. Ray was 5 feet 8 inches tall and was never overly concerned about his height. He was taller than 95% of the world's female population, and that suited him just fine. The man was 6'2" or more, with a beer belly hanging over the edge of a towel around his waist. Well, the woman, however, was the absolute center of attraction. "This is truly magnificent," Ray thought admiringly. The blonde was at least 6 feet tall in flat sandals. Dressed in a tight, sun-kissed dress, the woman had a Rubenesque physique, busty, with an hourglass figure, and an attractive ass. He took a breath and hardly looked away. The man in the towel responded with a chuckle. "Hey, it's not my fault you came back early." Stacy was just about to leave. The woman squeezed into the cabin past a man wrapped in a towel. "Fuck you, and continue sleeping with Stacy. I'm leaving here." Any further conversation was muffled as the door closed. Ray walked into his cabin through 2 doors on the left. He sat down on the sofa and turned on the ship's television system. Entertainment consisted mostly of movies you could watch during a long swim, and Ray wasn't interested in that right now. Moving on to the list of the ship's live attractions, Ray noticed something that caught his attention back when he was booking the trip. The Atlantic Star had a jazz club called the Blue Note. Inspired by an old Parisian jazz club, it was combined with themed areas of the ship showcasing different countries, their arts, entertainment, and cuisine. The Blue Note will feature live music every evening when the ship is not in port. It was almost 9 o'clock in the evening. Yes, this will make my evening unforgettable. Ray knew that if he was going to enjoy this trip at all, he had to keep himself busy. Ray smiled back and introduced himself. The band returned and played another 45-minute set. The 2 of them sat and enjoyed themselves, drinking one more. Ray couldn't help but look at her. Her height, blonde hair, and blue eyes spoke of Norwegian origin. She had broad shoulders for a woman, but they were offset by unusually beautiful features. Ray imagined her as the queen of some ancient Viking chieftain, capable of fighting alongside him in battle and blowing his brains out in the night. Ray changed his shirt to something more suitable for the evening and headed out. As he approached the elevators, he heard loud voices again. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry about your circumstances, but there's nothing I can do. The ship is packed to capacity. It's peak season now. There are no free cabins here." Ray turned the corner to see a stunning blonde towering over a white uniformed Pinnacle team member. She was clearly upset as she stood there with her 2 bags. "But where will I sleep?" she said with a worried expression on her face. The clerk gave her a sympathetic look. "Ma'am, you won't be the first and won't be the last to live in the gym's locker room and sleep on a sun lounger by one of the pools. If necessary, you can cover yourself with blankets. In my experience, this happens at least once per trip. Cruises seem to bring out the best in some people and the worst in others." Ray walked past them and was already in the moving elevator when a thought occurred to him. As the elevator descended, he pressed the button to return to his deck. The elevator doors opened, and he saw that the blonde had moved to a corner chair, covering her face with her hands. The ship's clerk disappeared. Ray approached the woman. She looked at him, clearly annoyed at being disturbed. "I assure you, Guy, I'm not looking for any company right now," she said, frowning. Ray looked at his hands. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I can help." Clearly thinking he was an asshole out to make some money, she laughed cruelly. "I highly doubt it." Ray looked up and met her gaze. They were icy blue. "Just listen to me. My travel companions decided at the last minute that they would not be able to go on this cruise, so I'm stuck in a two-bedroom cabin, all alone. I will be glad to offer you one of them. No strings attached, no expectations, and no fees." The woman stared at Ray doubtfully, without saying a word. Shrugging, Ray handed over his extra door card. "I'm going to go down to the Blue Note for a drink and listen to some jazz. Why don't you take a look around the cabin, make sure there's nothing nefarious going on there, and maybe we can see each other later." Without taking her eyes off Ray, she picked up the door card. "I'm going to ask the ship's security to come with me." Ray smiled. Smart lady. As he turned to leave, she spoke. "Why did your friends refuse the cruise?" Reaching into his pocket, Ray pulled out Missy's note and handed it to the woman. He then turned and walked towards the elevator with a loud exhale. Ray felt like he had been holding his breath ever since he read the note. It felt good to get rid of her. An hour later at the jazz club, a tall blonde slid into a curved booth next to Ray. She looked at him expectantly. "This is unusual. A kind gesture, and I really appreciate it, but I have a question." The band was on break between sets so they could talk quietly. Ray raised his glass of beer to his lips and smiled. "Shoot." The woman looked into his eyes again. Ray liked her straightforward manner. "Why didn't you just get a refund and cancel the trip?" Ray put down his glass. "I am the coordinator of the port management infrastructure. The CEO gives us points for good work, which we can exchange for cool things. I spent 6 years worth of points on this trip. If I canceled the trip, I would only get about $200 back. Alone or not, I decided there was no point in refusing." The woman thought about this before finally smiling. "I'm Tyra." She preferred light makeup in pink tones, and it suited her. Her wavy blonde hair was long and flowing. She appeared to be around 40 years old. Later, when Ray and Tyra were returning to the cabin, she once again returned to the topic of them living together. "Listen, I want there to be a clear agreement between us. I stay in the other bedroom. No jokes, no perversions, no ungentlemanly behavior," Tyra said with a smile. "Well, that concerns me, but how do I know you won't try to break into my room in the middle of the night?" Tyra laughed. "Trust me, you're not my type." Ray shrugged and extended his hand. "Then I think we have an agreement." Tyra shook it. "I have just one more question." She asked with a smile, "What the hell is an infrastructure coordinator?" Returning to the cabin, they wished each other good night and went to their rooms. Lulled by the movement of the ship, they both slept soundly until they were rudely awakened around 3 o'clock in the morning. Tyra! You bitch!" The scream was interrupted by a loud knock on the cabin door. Ray and Tyra came out of their rooms at the same time. He was wearing a t-shirt and boxers, and she was pulling a rope over a short lace nightgown. Tyra raised her hand to Ray in an "it's okay" gesture. Ray nodded and stepped back as Tyra opened the cabin door. Her ex, Charlie, stood there, disheveled and smelling of booze. "There you are. There you are, you bitch. Stacy told me you already slept with some bastard," Charlie shouted. Tyra straightened up to her full height. "Charlie, I'll give you 5 seconds to get the hell away from me, then I'll call security." Ray admired her. She was not afraid of this drunkard. "Great. Call them. See if I care." "There is no prison here," she quickly replied. "Then maybe they'll throw your cheating ass overboard." Tyra stepped back and walked over to the intercom on the wall. Ray saw that Charlie was about to enter the cabin after her and blocked his path in the doorway. The drunkard stared down at Ray and unconsciously took a big step back. The short man smiled at him, and it unsettled Charlie. "Who the hell are you? You better move away before you get hurt, little man." Charlie spat. Ray could see people peeking out of their cabin doors. "It's time to end this," he thought. "Sorry, old Charlie, but Tyra will be better off here than with you." Ray heard Tyra sigh and whisper, "Oh, shit." It took Charlie a few seconds to realize that he had been insulted. He growled and grabbed Ray's shirt on his left shoulder. "No, Charlie, don't do this! I'm not with him!" Tyra screams excitedly. Ray ducked under the large grasping hand and ended up next to Charlie. Charlie's arm twisted out from under his t-shirt. Just as Charlie's eyes were watching Ray in confusion, Ray's left hand came up and rested on the big man's right shoulder, and his right hand fell on Charlie's right wrist. The combination of movement and some effort on Ray's part threw the drunken man forward, and Charlie, losing his balance, hit his forehead against the metal door frame with a thud. The ship's security team rounded the corner just as Charlie sank to his knees with a groan. "Hey, can you help me with this guy?" Ray smiled at the large men. "I think he drank too much. It looks like he tripped." The security team captured Charlie. "It's okay. We were looking for this guy. He called some women on 4 decks. Come on, buddy, you'll be sent to the guardhouse," the security officer said as they lifted the big drink. "I doubt you'll enjoy this trip very much." Ray closed the door as the team left. "It looks like they have a prison after all," he said with a smile. "Well, good night." Ray turned back to his room without another word. Tyra just looked after him in amazement. When the sun rose, it found the Atlantic Star moored in Freeport, Grand Bahama. The morning was magnificent. Ray walked out of his bedroom to find a lovely blonde sitting dejectedly on the couch, still in her robe. Being a pretty smart guy, he figured that any plans Tyra might have had to visit the port were probably out the window, since her ex was paying for the trip. Charlie was here for a high school reunion, which seemed like an educated guess. "Listen, Tyra, I don't know what your plans are for today, but I have a number of options paid for. I'm heading to a beach resort on one of the eastern bays of this island. I would be happy if you would join me. Our agreement is still valid," Ray added with a smile. Tyra raised her head. "You are sure? I don't want to be a nuisance." Laughing, Ray pretended to be thoughtful, putting a finger to his chin. Let's see. I could be walking along a tropical beach alone, feeling sorry for myself, or I could be walking along the beach with a beautiful woman. What should I choose?" Her mocking look made him smile. "Get dressed. Our ferry leaves in 45 minutes." Tyra smiled back and jumped to her feet. Ray enjoyed watching her sensual body move under the robe. The couple boarded a small ferry that took them to an old resort on a distant bay. It was a tropical paradise. Palm trees, clean sand, crystal clear water, and fewer tourists. When they arrived, Ray had arranged for a small thatched gazebo on the beach, sun loungers, snorkeling equipment, refreshments, and towels. It was perfect. As they prepared to enter the water, Ray took off his khaki shirt and Tyra almost gasped out loud. "Holy cow, this man is amazing," Tyra thought, looking away. But then I changed my mind. Why shouldn't she look if it's pleasing to the eye? Ray's upper body was amazingly developed, but not like a bodybuilder's. He was thin and fit, a little chest hair which Tyra secretly appreciated. There was no harm in watching. Ray was definitely keeping an eye on her. You would have to be blind not to notice his admiring eyes. "God, Ray, do you work out a lot at the gym?" The man smiled. "Not at all, not a bit. Martial arts. I've been studying since high school." Tyra tried not to show how impressed she was. "Oh, that explains the knot Charlie must have had on his head this morning." Her face became serious. "You could really hurt him if you wanted to." "But you didn't do it." Ray shrugged. "This is not my style, and that's not why I'm into martial arts." "I'm glad," Tyra said with a sincere smile. Taking off his cargo shorts, Ray found himself in his swim trunks. They weren't long surf shorts or swim trunks, but something in between in length. They showed off Ray's toned lower body well, and Tyra loved it. He picked up his snorkeling gear and grinned at Tyra. "Are you coming?" She smiled back. "Right behind you." Tyra came down to him. Instead of the oversized t-shirt she wore on the cruise ship, she wore a bright blue one-piece swimsuit. The trouser legs were French cut, with a low cut that was laced almost to the very top. The swimsuit, of course, showed off her amazing cleavage. Tyra's breasts were very large. Ray's heart began to beat wildly, and a trembling ran through his entire body. Tyra stepped into the cool water. "Oh, this is just a divine feeling," she smiled, splashing water on herself. Ray's hands shook as he watched the streams of water flow down this wonderful valley, and he dropped his mask and snorkel into the water. Picking up the mask, he looked at Tyra a little embarrassed. "He really thinks I'm attractive," she thought. "He's not my type, though." "Are you okay?" Tyra smiled. "Who am I?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Ray said sheepishly. The couple entered the water and headed towards a large reef, which was pointed out by a resort employee. They spent the next hour admiring the beauty of the tropical reef and its native inhabitants, and secretly admiring each other as they swam. Later, they both lay out in the sun for a while, and Ray noticed a nice base tan as Tyra applied the cream. "Do you work outside?" Ray asked. Without looking up, Tyra replied, "Yes, I'm a government wildlife officer. I spend all my time on my boat or outdoors." Ray was impressed. "Wow, this is interesting. Are you a Cocoa Beach local?" Tyra looked up at him and noticed that he was looking at her face with a sweet smile. "Not far. Port St. John. Tell me, I'm wondering what was the reason for this trip." Tyra glanced sideways at Ray. His face fell. "I was planning to propose in Cozumel." Tyra covered her mouth, dumbfounded at her callousness. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm such an ass." Ray sat down and took a deep breath. "No, everything is fine. I was planning to propose on a zeppelin under the jungle canopy in Cozumel with her friends to capture the happy moment. I have a ring locked in a safe on a ship." He laughed mirthlessly. "Hey, at least I can get my money back for this, right? Just like last time." "Last time?" Tyra whispered, knowing that she was doing the wrong thing. Ray chuckled. "Yes, I have 2 unsuccessful attempts at engagement. Even before Missy, my previous girlfriend, did something similar." He stood up and took a deep breath. "Look, I'd like to never talk about this again for the rest of the trip. In fact, never in my life. Would you like to take a walk with me on this beautiful beach, beautiful lady?" Ray extended his hand to help Tyra up. She smiled and took his hand. It didn't take long for the mood to improve. They spent the day together walking, swimming, and talking. By the end of the evening, there was a lot of eye contact and sexy smiles. The couple returned to the Atlantic Star shortly before dinner. They were tired, but happy. After their shower, they changed and met in the living room to discuss dinner plans. Ray wore white linen shorts and a Hawaiian print shirt. Tyra wore a lovely sun-kissed floral print dress that flattered her figure beautifully. They blushed when they caught each other's admiring glances. Tyra stood up and smiled down at him. She reached out and cupped Ray's cheek in her large, soft hand. "I am pleased to hear that." She nodded towards the cookie. "Why don't you check your fortune cookies? They are very good." Then she turned and went into the cabin. Ray followed her, and then looked at the cookie. It is wrapped in a small piece of decorative foil with Chinese characters on it. The cookies were thicker than usual and sprinkled with confectioner's sugar. A fortune-telling tag stuck out on one side. Ray pulled it out of the cookie and read the inscription. The top was pre-printed on a piece of paper in red ink. The resume, however, was handwritten in a small feminine hand. Confucius said the new agreement could lead to wonderful things. The cookie fell from Ray's fingers. He stared at the piece of paper, not quite believing what he read. "She offers?" Ray stood up and looked through the door. Tyra's bedroom door was open, and her sundress lay in a heap in the doorway. He stared at it for almost a minute, trying to decipher the meaning. "Appreciate this, old man? She wants you." the old wise Confucius whispered to him. Ray stepped through her doorway and stared at the heavenly vision within. A gorgeous blonde lay naked on a double bed. Wavy hair fanned out over her head. Tyra smiled softly, rolling onto Ray's side, placing her hand seductively on her hip. Beautiful full breasts lay one on top of the other. He stood rooted to the spot. In response, Tyra placed a finger on her full lips. Shh. Confucius spoke into Ray's mind again. Less talk, more action. Finally, breaking out of his trance, Ray smiled and unbuttoned and took off his shirt. The woman smiled approvingly, but her eyes widened as Ray pulled down his shorts and boxers and stepped out of them. Ray climbed onto the bed and slid next to Tyra on the right side. She pulled him towards her for a passionate kiss, leaning back. They kissed for several minutes before he grew bolder enough to allow his hands to slide over the fullness of her luxurious body. They had sex, which left them exhausted. Finally, they collapsed next to each other, looking into each other's eyes as they caught their breath. Tyra, that was... I can't even... Ray trailed off. She sighed contentedly and smiled. Tis. Tyra rolled over and covered Ray's hand with hers. Ray positioned himself behind Tyra's lovely big ass and pulled up the pillows for both of them. In the blink of an eye, the lovers fell fast asleep. It was a busy day. It was dark when Ray felt Tyra stir on the bed. The Atlantic Star sailed at midnight, and he felt the ship rock gently. Ray heard her go to the bathroom and do her business there. The cruise ships are lit up like a small town at night, so there was enough light to see each other. Ray rolled onto his back to watch as instead of lying back down, Tyra came and knelt down next to him. His heart began to beat faster, and she leaned in and kissed him deeply. She ran her hand over his chest and then began to satisfy him. She then kissed Ray again, who responded enthusiastically. Tyra liked it. The more she got to know Ray, the more she liked him. It was a good feeling. Tyra laid her head on him and made herself comfortable, pressing herself against her stomach. Sleep, she whispered. Ray answered quietly. Tyra could hear the smile on his face. The lovers woke up at dawn. They fell asleep shortly after sunset and, one might say, slept through the night. The sun was rising overboard, and their cabin was flooded with pale morning light. They smiled tenderly at each other, a knowing, sexy smile that made them feel great. Tyra spoke first. So, about our agreement? So what was there? Ray rolled onto his side and propped himself up on his elbow. I remember something about a ban on jokes, perversions, and ungentlemanly behavior. She turned to Ray and ran her hand over his muscular chest. Well, I think we've already broken the rule a bit. So, let's talk about the rest. I don't know about you, but I think kink is definitely the order of the day, and I'd like to see more of it being ungentlemanly. What do you think? Ray grinned and lowered his head to Tyra's full breasts and began kissing them. Looking away, he smiled. I think this is very appropriate. She smiled back. Okay. He leaned back. How about you sneak into my room? Tyra sighed. Quite possible, I suppose. And what was it about me not being your type? Turning over, Tyra reached for something on her nightstand. Ray admired her amazing ass with pleasure. I'll definitely devote time to this, he thought. Tyra looked back and saw where Ray was looking. She smiled and shook her butt, and he grinned like a kid at Christmas. Tyra rolled back and handed Ray a piece of paper. It was another handwritten fortune teller. Confucius said, "Open yourself to new possibilities." Ray smiled. Old Confucius was a pretty smart guy. The couple got dressed and went down to the French-style restaurant to have breakfast. They were both dying of hunger. As they ate, they watched another couple try to seat their 4 children at the dinner table. Have children? Tyra asked, looking intently at Ray. He finished his piece. No? At your place? I have a 16-year-old daughter. She lives with her father in Tampa. Tyra scanned Ray's face for any sign of concern. Nothing like this. Ray nodded. This is cute. It's only a couple of hours away. Do you see her often? Tyra smiled and nodded. After breakfast, they planned their day. Since the ship would be at sea all day, they wanted to explore the ship's various themed areas, spend some time at the pool, and stay away from the 97 alumni who, according to breakfast gossip, were getting into drunken brawls. After a light lunch, they returned to their room and changed to the pool. On the top deck, there was a swimming pool for adults only. It is clear that not every adult wants to be surrounded by screaming, splashing children. Ray was wearing swim trunks that looked like the ones he wore to the beach. Tyra wore a green one-piece swimsuit that showed off even more cleavage than the previous one. Both Ray and most of the men on the pool deck enjoyed watching Tyra apply sunscreen. Turning around, she smiled sweetly and asked Ray to finish the job on her back. "I'd like to see you in a bikini," Ray whispered over Tyra's shoulder. "I have. Maybe in Cozumel I'll wear this for you." "Well, if I wore it on a ship, a crowd would gather and the crew would throw me overboard." Ray laughed loudly. "You distract most men." Women get a little annoyed when their husbands become so distracted. Tyra lay down on her stomach. She looked at Ray and smiled. "Remember what I said about flattery? Handsome? Do something that would get us both thrown overboard?" He laughed, leaned back, and put on his sunglasses. "It might be worth it." "Miss Gowan?" The ship's clerk, who had spoken with Tyra the first evening, approached them as they exited the pool. "Yes?" The clerk glanced at Ray. "Hello again. I'm glad to see that you are still enjoying your time on board." Tyra smiled and looked at Ray. "Yes. Cruises really seem to bring out the best in some people. What can I do for you?" The clerk tried his best to not let his gaze wander over Tyra's voluptuous body, but he wasn't entirely successful. "Actually, several things. The first concerns your former companion, Charles. Looks like this guy took a swing at one of the ship's security officers when they took him into custody." Tyra crossed her arms over her huge chest. "Not surprising. What does this have to do with me?" "Well, that violates the behavioral part of the contract he signed when he bought the trip. This means his entire trip is canceled and he will remain in the brig until we return to Port Canaveral with no refund. Fortunately, this does not apply to you. Your food and entertainment stamps will continue to be valid." "Amazing. Thanks for letting me know. It was interesting to me." Tyra's dazzling smile shone brightly, and the young man couldn't help but blush. "That brings me to the topic of his cabin." The clerk looked at Ray again. "May I assume you don't need that cabin? If so, I have a favor to ask." She was intrigued. "What's happened?" "It seems that the young man got in touch with one of our elderly passengers, women from among the participants in the alumni meeting. A young man with his bride on board." Tyra frowned. "An abandoned young girl needs a cabin?" The clerk cleared his throat. "Yes. For God's sake, I totally sympathize, so let her use that cabin." Tyra walked over and kissed the stunned clerk on the cheek. "It was because you took the time to find me and help the poor girl. You could just let her sleep by the pool." The young man blushed a second time with a shy smile. "And finally, your former companion Charles asked you to visit him at the guardhouse. He wants to settle everything." She laughed mockingly. "Tell him to drop dead." I wish I had never met him. Looking at Ray, Tyra thought, on the other hand, if I had never met him. She decided to keep this thought to herself. The couple had a fabulous day at the pool, ate amazing food, and attended a concert by a 90s rock band that once sold out arenas. As they walked back into the room, Ray took Tyra's hand. Tyra smiled. "It's like a summer camp romance, isn't it? Like when we were kids." Ray smiled back. "Yes, this is a wonderful feeling. I wouldn't trade it for anything." She took a risk by talking about Missy, but she wanted to know. "You wouldn't even trade it for a successful proposal in the Cozumel jungle?" Instead of the expected frown, Ray smiled at her. "Did I mention my list of all the Missy crap I'm better off without? I made a list just before I met you." She smiled and put her arm around Ray's shoulders as they walked. "No, but please tell me." Tyra giggled. The couple returned to their cabin, kissed, and headed to their rooms to shower. A whirlwind raged in Ray's head. Never in his wildest imagination could he imagine that this wonderful, sexy woman would come into his life like this. Ray thought, I hope this isn't like a summer camp romance, because summer camp romances always ended. Every time. Sometime later, Ray was sitting on the couch in his boxers, checking his email and messages on his phone. Wi-Fi wasn't as fast as at home, but it got the job done. His attention was distracted by a slight buzzing noise coming from Tyra's room. Ray stood up and noticed that Tyra's door was open and the room was dimly lit. As he got closer to the door, he recognized the sound and grinned wildly. Ray stepped into the doorway. Just like last night, he was greeted by a heavenly vision. Tyra took her bed pillows and used them to sit up on the bed, facing the door. She wore a short, pale blue peignoir with a deep neckline trimmed with lace. The set was complemented by a pair of matching thong panties. Tyra smiled sharply at Ray. The sound came from a silver cylindrical sex toy that Tyra was playing with. For the second night in a row, he just walks right into my boudoir without even knocking. How bad. So ungentlemanly. Tyra pouted, biting her bottom lip. Guilty on all counts. Tyra purred. That's cute. Ah, Tyra whispered, stopping him halfway. Go back to the door, love. I want you to look. Ray's breath caught in his throat, and his heart began to beat wildly in his chest. Trembling, he backed towards the door. After playing with a sex toy, they had passionate sex. Exhausted, Ray sat back on his heels, breathing heavily, his heart beating a mile a minute. It was wonderful. Tyra looked appreciatively at his heaving body. Kiss me goodnight. He crossed his right leg over Tyra's left thigh and lay down next to her. They kissed passionately. Tyra pulled away and smiled. I'm broken. Good night, honey. We're having a really good time. I'm looking forward to tomorrow in Cozumel with you. Finally, Tyra lightly touched Ray's chin. She took the middle of the bed and pulled the sheet over herself. Could you turn off the light when you go out? Ray smiled, slid out of bed, and turned off the light. The next morning, Ray woke up to the sounds and smells of the port of San Miguel de Cozumel. He stood up naked and went out onto the balcony. It looked like a wonderful day was starting. An announcement came over the intercom about what was planned at this charming port. Oh, I hate advertisements. Tyra came out of her room in a robe, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her beautiful blonde hair was in disarray. She noticed Ray's tight, bare ass on the balcony and thought to herself, I can get used to this. Ray walked over to kiss her. It was a little strange to be looking for a kiss, Ray thought, but his desire overrode any male concerns about it. I'm going to take a shower. Tyra purred. You made me so dirty last night. They kissed. I can still smell me on your face. Did it give you sexy dreams? Ray grinned. Yes, but what I see when I'm awake is much better. Tyra turned and began to undress, heading back to her room. Well, you're flattering again, handsome. Go get yourself cleaned up. Let's go enjoy Cozumel. Neither room had a shower large enough for the two of them, which was a major disappointment. True to her word, Tyra actually wore a bikini. The pretty pink halter bikini with a French cutout looked amazing with her blonde hair and tanned body. A thin, white, tight dress was worn over the bikini. Ray openly admired this as she left the room. Tyra walked over and kissed Ray. I wish it was a thong bikini, but I'm just too big for it. She clutched her chest and grinned. He kissed her again and reached out to grab Tyra's curvy ass. I approve with all my heart. They left the ship and spent a good part of the day just exploring the exotic port city. Ray bought Tyra a beautiful straw sun hat from a market vendor. Tyra blushed when he gave her the hat. Ray was happy like a child. After that, they did the usual tourist things, joining a tour group, visiting ancient Mayan sites, ending up at a freshwater lake where they snorkeled and enjoying the sights. They ate at local markets and roadside cantinas. One thing that the locals kept mentioning throughout the day was that the Cozumel sunset is a sight not to be missed. So, as evening approached, they hailed a local taxi driven by an amazing guy named Diego. "I think you will be very pleased with the view from Grand Cozumel Beach. There are bars and restaurants here where nightlife is in full swing after sunset." That sounded pretty good to Ray, until Tyra leaned over and whispered in his ear and kissed his neck. Diego, that sounds pretty tempting, but we were wondering if there was another place somewhere off the beaten track. Somewhere more secluded." Diego pulled his white and red taxi out of the lane and stopped the car on the side of the road. The man turned to look at them. Diego narrowed his eyes and looked at the couple. "Secluded, you say? A place where you could watch the sunset without anyone seeing you?" Tyra spoke in a hoarse voice. "Yes, that would be ideal." Diego looked back and forth between Ray and Tyra and shared their knowing smile. "Yes, there is such a beach, but it is not located near any tourist areas. Only local residents know about this. I took my wife Kukai there many times to watch the sunset. This may require a half-mile walk, but there are always taxis passing by, so you won't have any problems getting back. Does it suit you?" Ray and Tyra smiled and said at the same time, "That would be great." They got out of the taxi with their bag and blanket. Ray shook Diego's hand through the car window and paid the fare with a surcharge for his assistance. "Follow this path for half a mile until you come to a large cave. It's just a passage through the rock, maybe 100 feet, fairly lighted. When you exit the cave, turn sharply to the left, and you will see several ancient stairs carved into the rock. Head up to the top and you'll find some nice grassy spots to rest above the beach. Farewell." The couple looked around the area as Diego drove away. Several local cars were parked here. The path was ancient and lined with stones. Nothing raised any alarm bells, so they smiled and headed down the path. As promised, there was a huge cave in the rock half a mile below. Through the palm trees, you could hear the sound of waves on the other side. They climbed up the stairs until they came to what looked like a huge rock outcrop that ran along the shore for at least half a mile. Storms have left a layer of beach sand in some places and thick grass in others. Down the slope there was a nice grassy area with bushes on either side. They spread their blanket just a few feet from the edge. It was about time. Sunset was in about 20 minutes. Ray and Tyra lay on their backs, leaning on their elbows, and smiled at each other, enjoying the beautiful view of the sea. Moments later, they embraced, kissing passionately as their tongues explored each other. They kissed for quite a long time, their hands wandering. Tyra broke the kiss and stood up. "Do you hear that?" Ray listened and heard someone groan quietly. "Looks like we're not the only ones enjoying this beach." Tyra got down on all fours and crawled to the edge of the cliff. Looking back, she motioned for Ray to crawl over to her. Below on the sand, two beautiful entwined bodies writhed on a blanket. Tyra's heart skipped a beat when she saw this sight. The young man was clearly a tourist. Blonde hair, thin and untanned. The woman may have been a local resident with stunning dark hair and skin, an athletic build and high, firm breasts. They lay naked, in close embraces. "Oh, look at them," Tyra whispered admiringly. Ray looked but found himself staring at Tyra and her reaction with his mouth open. Oh yeah, she likes perversion. He thought to himself. Below, a young man was having sex with a woman. Every time the young man caressed the woman, Tyra made a whispering "ha" sound as if she was being touched. Ray stepped back a few feet and knelt down next to Tyra's gorgeous big ass sticking up in the air. Ray ran his hands over it reverently, expressing his intentions. A shiver ran through Tyra's body, and she moved her ass for him. Taking this as permission, he smoothly pulled Tyra's bikini bottom down her hips. She pushed back, as if she were doing a push-up, so Ray could pull the trunks down her legs. Returning to where he started, Ray wrapped both hands around Tyra's thick right thigh and pulled it towards him, and began to passionately kiss her buttocks. Watching the lovers lit up all the pleasure sensors in her brain, and now Ray caressed her with his magnificent hands. She moaned as quietly as she could, breathing heavily through clenched teeth. Tyra wanted to scream, but she didn't want to disturb the lovers below. A few minutes later, the lovers on the sand screamed in passion. The man slipped, the golden woman rolled over, and they hugged each other. After watching enough of the lovers, they also had sex. Gasping, he collapsed on Tyra, burying his face in her sweat-covered chest. Tyra pulled him towards her. They lay in a tight embrace for 10 minutes or so, just enjoying the amazing aftertaste. When Ray moved away from Tyra, he lay down next to her, and they kissed each other deeply, not noticing or caring that the beautiful Cozumel sunset happened as planned, despite the lack of attention from the lovers. The next morning, they slept quite late. They were seasick from the movement of the ship. Ray rubbed the sleep from his eyes when Tyra came out of her room, already dressed for the day. She walked over and kissed him quickly. "Ray, I'd like to spend the day minding my own business. I hope you do not mind." Ray looked at her questioningly. "Why should I object?" Tyra turned pale. "I don't know, we were together the whole trip and Ray looked into her eyes. "This is great. Go and do what you want. There were no obligations, remember? No expectations." She stepped towards the door and grabbed her bag. "See you at dinner, okay? Shall we meet in a German-themed dining room?" Ray smiled. "Sounds great. Have a good day." Her answering smile was unconvincing. "Man, this has been a weird week," Ray sighed. "Luckily, there is always something to do and see on a cruise ship." Ray spent some time in the gym. He watched the show, chatted with other passengers over lunch, and just chilled on the sun deck, enjoying being at sea. However, he missed Tyra. He missed her smiles and everything. She was smart, beautiful, funny, and interesting. Before he knew it, he was already making a list of things without which he would be worse off if this summer romance ended tomorrow. He spent most of the day thinking. It was almost time for dinner, and Ray had butterflies in his stomach. Tyra joined him, and they smiled for a while. But it was clear that there was something unspoken that needed clarification. At the dinner table, Ray made his first attempt. "Tyra, I really want to talk to you about—" But she stopped him with a smile. "Not here, okay? Let's talk in the cabin." The couple ate and agreed to meet in the wardroom later that evening. Ray tried to persuade her to meet him earlier, but she was adamant. "It was all so unexpected. I'm processing it all. See you at 7. The cabin door opened at 6:45. Ray was packing his things when Tyra walked into his cabin and sat on the edge of the bed. Ray smiled, and she smiled back. "Ray, it was a wonderful, unexpected trip." Ray braced himself for a "but." That did not happen. "You were so much fun, and I really like you. I don't want this to end." "And you?" Ray looked into her blue eyes. "No, I don't want that either," Ray whispered, and his heart filled with hope. Tyra took a deep breath and continued. "This is a new romance for both of us, a sex-filled romance on the high seas, and that's probably not the best starting point for a relationship." Ray nodded evasively. "We started this wild ride, and it was intense, sexy, and fun. But this is not our real life." Tyra stood up and walked towards Ray until they were almost touching. "But damn it, Ray, life is too damn short to worry about that kind of crap. Do you think we can take a step back and somehow fit this new experience into our lives?" Ray smiled. "Any plans for Friday evening? So we'll start with dates after all this?" Tyra said with a laugh. Ray leaned over and took Tyra's hand. Confucius said, "He who does not risk gains nothing." A bubble of laughter escaped Tyra's mouth. Yes, this guy is Confucius. He was damn smart. They ended the conversation with a sweet kiss, as all conversations between lovers should. They packed their things and got dressed for bed before turning on a movie on the TV. Then they stood up and kissed. As Tyra turned to head to her room, Ray gently took her hand. Turning to his room, he led her to his bed and pulled back the covers. Straightening up, He looked into her icy blue eyes, which he just couldn't seem to get enough of, and smiled. Just sleep. No gags. Perversions of ungentlemanly behavior. Tyra smiled back, looking dubious. Yes, of course. The lovers went to bed. But after a while, Tyra reached out to Ray in the dark, and they never slept again. They turned to each other and kissed as if it was the first time. Warm and passionate, the kiss reignited the fire inside them. Ray wrapped his arm around her and hugged her tightly. Tyra could feel him getting excited. Although they had been together several times, this was the first time they had made love in the dark, and it was wonderful. The light of the rising sun flooded the cabin. Ray was already awake when Tyra came out of his bedroom. He put down the phone and looked at her hungrily. She walked past him naked, carrying her nightgown. Tyra winced. Has anyone ever looked at her like that? The sight of Ray naked sitting on the couch made her mouth water. When Tyra came out of her room, Ray's jaw dropped. Tyra was gorgeously naked, except for a pair of 5-inch black leather heels. Her golden hair was combed and hung over her shoulders, glistening in the morning light. Tyra towered over the seated Ray. She stopped at Ray's knees and stretched for her morning stretch, her pussy at eye level with him. Finally looking at Ray, she smiled seductively. Good morning, baby. Ray's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. His eyes widened. Oh, goddess, good morning. Tyra bent at the waist, placed her hands on Ray's hips, and leaned in to kiss him. Her breasts and pearls hung down. She broke the kiss by licking his bottom lip. Straightening up, she turned around, walked to the other end of the sofa, and sat down. She leaned on the armrest and stretched out her legs on Ray's lap. His hands ran over her ankles, feet, and those sexy black pumps. She looked down at her phone while her other hand reached up and squeezed her left breast rather roughly. The ship's itinerary says we won't be home until 4 p.m. Putting down the phone, she looked at Ray hungrily in a way that made his heart beat faster. Ray started to get excited. What are we going to do all day? She whispered seductively. Room service, Ray answered without hesitation. Tyra smiled and lifted her right leg from Ray's lap to bend it and spread her legs further. When the lovers came ashore, it was raining in Port Canaveral. They looked into each other's eyes constantly as they left the ship, both in the afterglow of the day's carnal pleasures. As they left the ship, they often smiled and touched each other. As they stepped onto the pier, they heard an excited female voice shouting, Ray! Ray! Ray turned. Oh, for God's sake! He looked at Tyra. This is Missy. Ray was surprised to see Tyra smiling. Nothing surprising. She had time to think things over. She said as if nothing had happened. Ray frowned. She had almost 3 years to think. Missy ran towards them along the pier, stopping right in front of them. Missy was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, attractive, with short black hair and dark eyes. But at the moment she was looking only at Ray. Oh, Ray, I'm so sorry. I was such an idiot. I didn't understand. At that moment, Missy noticed that Ray and Tyra were holding hands. Missy's jaw dropped. Awestruck, she looked Tyra up and down. Tyra looked stunning in jeans and an off-the-shoulder white linen blouse. She towered over Missy in 2-inch strappy heels. Tyra beamed at her. Missy pointed at Tyra with her mouth open and looked at Ray, puzzled. What the hell is this? Ray laughed. I was lucky on the trip. Then his face became serious and he looked into Missy's eyes. In fact, I'm damn sure my whole life has changed for the better. Goodbye, Missy. Don't bother leaving my key. Stepping to the right, Ray led Tyra past a stunned Missy. Tyra handed Missy a folded piece of paper as she passed. It was nice to meet you. Still in disbelief, Missy turned to watch them walk around her before looking at the paper. She unfolded the paper and realized that it was the letter she had given to Dina to give to Ray. Letter of separation. As she was about to crumble it in her growing anger, she noticed something written on the back. Small, feminine handwriting. Mae West said, "She who hesitates is a damn fool." Ray and Tyra dated for a year before moving in together. 2 years after the cruise, while camping in Colorado, Tyra gave Ray an engagement ring and asked him to marry her. He enthusiastically agreed. The wedding is being prepared. Missy and Charlie are not invited. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.